brought to you by Bernadette Boule.
Camera on. Woo, Awesome. What a wow.
I don't feel it. I'm still sick, I must tell you. So I do have my pack of tissues next to me. I hardly slept because I was trying to be ready for you. Drinking Carenza and ACC 200 and all. So I hope, it feels like my voice is doing okay right now.
Good. Okay, you look good. You don't look.
Thank you.
You did the things. Yeah, no.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited about today's topic.
Grand. Yeah.
I mean, look, I got into the topic when I read the book called No Logo by Naomi Klein.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had a read through it, but it was like...
I read No Logo like 20 years ago. I should probably revisit it. Yes, but I have read it, yeah.
See, she's actually upgraded or not up. What do they do when they do it after 10 years or something? They revisit and they like update it and stuff like that.
Got you. Yeah. And what was your outtake?
It's this discussion because I really wanted to get a sense in terms of how South African brands are faring. And you know what's nice about old books is that you can always revisit and say, is this actually what she said? Because she kind of borders on a futurist opinion. And so it's interesting to get a sense of whatever she predicted, is that really the case? Right. But also just for me, it's a passion because it's a couple of my vocations, which is politics and international relations, and then marketing and comms. And you're like, oh, okay. She did the things with the books and really got into, and I just kept thinking, how does this woman get to have so much content and everything she's saying, you like taking notes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we live amongst geniuses, right?
I know.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining me. The podcast, I don't know if you've had a look at what we do, how it works, but I'm big on conversation. So it's going to be a mix of podcast interview, but more a conversation because I don't think when you go into an interview, you need to know everything. I want to walk in here actually learning something from what you bring into the table. So please feel free, if you have your water or you need to get your water, let me know.
Fantastic.
But yeah, so I saw that a couple of TBWA agencies went to Mauritius, was it?
Yes, we did. We were there. It was fantastic. So what happens on a yearly basis, and this was the first physical one we had since 2019.
Oh, wow.
We get together with the affiliates across the continent. And we get into a room and see what's happening around the world, where we're taking things from a TBWA point of view, and then just having an African conversation. So it's always so intriguing just sitting amongst our African colleagues. And I say African, but we're also African. And I think that's the era about us South Africans, right? We call Africa while we are in Africa as well. But it's drawing insights from that and hopefully moving it an inch closer to success beyond what we have achieved. Yeah. It was really, really great.
Tell me something. I've noticed you have grid. There's also, what is this, yellow wood? How does it work? Are you guys, has TBWA brought you guys over, or how is it? How's the setup?
Yeah. So ordinarily, TBWA will have a stake in the various opcos. So in South Africa, I represent grid from a design, but also above the line point of view. And then there's Yellowwood, obviously, as you say, they're a strategy consultant. We've got Magna Carta, they do PR, and then we've got TBWA Huntless Scars itself, which is a through the line agency. So we all sit under TBWA South Africa. We have all these different offerings, and we work together where we can or where we should. For instance, on MTN, we work as a collective on that account because of its size. But then we also have different pieces of business that we work on separately. But I think it's just, the ability to come together when we need to, and then to separate when we have to, just, expanding on our expertise as opcos.
So there's no competition or anything like that?
Well, there is. in places, but not on the accounts that we work on. So we will, but I mean, we're very clear, and that's what I like about TBWA. Should anything come to Grid and TBW, Handlers Cars, we'll have a conversation, and see who goes for it, who's better geared for it from the skills, from a skills point of view, from a people's point of view. So yeah, I mean, there will be inklings of it, but it's never aggressive. It's never, in bad spirit. We all want the best for ourselves as a collective.
That's interesting, because I saw you attended it. I think Karabo also attended it. And who's this lady? Uzama. And I'm like, wait, man, you guys all going to the same place. So it's actually
no, I mean, even now I'm sitting in the TBWA building.
Okay.
And we all on, like, we occupy about 3 floors of the building, and we move into, it's almost a seamless kind of operation amongst ourselves, simply because we do have to work together on certain businesses. So there's no point in us not, getting on. But from a business point of view, it really does make sense, because we've got, as I say, different expertise. From a Grid point of view, we come from a design background, even though we are venturing into above the line and experiential. There's still quite a bit that we can get from a Karabo, from a Handlers Cars point of view. Zama and Refule at Yellowwood bring in a different perspective, etc. So it works out quite amazingly. I must say, I think TBWA thus far has been the best network I've worked with, in terms of how we connect as opcos. As much as there is that spirit of competition, it's also very, well glued together for the effort of the collective.
No, I like that. And I think it also talks to collaboration, where businesses are moving away from competing and saying, how can we work together to actually move each other forward, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's where the world is moving. I've just published an article with Mark Lives, and it speaks about that, and for me, it's interesting that you talk about politics, because having studied psychology and community development, I do find that there's something interesting that we need to do together as private sector and public sector, so for me, that also speaks about collaboration and how we as marketers and advertisers are going to move the needle just around the communities that we work with, and improving the world that we live in, especially, South Africa. It's not like we're short of problems. So how do we work on that, influencing policy, if you like, as advertisers and marketers, and having those very in-depth conversations with the public sector to make us move in a better direction as a society.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what intrigued me a lot about how Naomi writes about how brands have been able to influence policy, right? Just from a perspective where government has had limited resources, and these big companies, these big brands have been able to come on board and be able to, refurbish, whether it be a basketball court in the US, or, upgrade a school with their brands. And even in some instances, in our case, where, you have the likes of SAB saying, I'll take on the school and be able to rebrand it. But then there's also that conflict of interest where you are an alcohol brand at a primary school, and we have a huge influx of alcoholism and the problem in South Africa. Talk to me about what your thoughts are about situations like that, where there's a conflict of interest, but the brand is really helping the community.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I was thinking also about, SAB itself through the brand calling Black Label, and obviously what they're trying to do with their No Excuses campaign. We know, as you say, that we have a scourge around alcoholism as a country, and GBV. So in a way, the brand, as it delivers its product, kind of perpetuates the problem. But it's a tricky one. I think knowing where you stand and knowing and educating the customer is quite important. I do hold a bit of a dissent, the view on alcohol in primary school for me doesn't sit quite well. But that's just my opinion. I know marketers sit in rooms and they want to do good, but I do think that, understanding where the society stands, where our communities stand in terms of, the problems that they face, we do need to be more considerate. So though those collaborations can work in places where they do not impact negatively, because we know, I mean, I remember, the reason why we get into spaces where a toothpaste is called Colgate is because I was exposed to it in primary school. So when you start, embedding those ideas and memory structures in kids, what does that lead to? So absolutely, we need to have better conversations and target better, I think, our spaces. Yes, we want to have an impact, but is that the right way to go about making that impact? I'm not so sure. But I'm sure that there are brands that are suited for that kind of work. If Hennessy is going to paint a basketball court, in a university, perhaps yes. But let's find the spaces that are appropriate for the messages that we have to share, considering what our services and products have to deliver to society.
And do you find that South African lawmakers are quite aware of that distinction, or do you feel that we still have a long way to go in terms of being able to put those measures in place? Because I think there's also that part that we're missing, where we have to educate our government that, guys, as much as SAB has got this big, and sorry to SAB, or no offense, it's really just a discussion to understand, but it's got this big budget, but it really does affect our economy and it not being in the space. Because I also know institutions like DG Murray Trust, who are doing research about how alcohol, when it was locked down, actually positively affected our communities, but negatively affected our economy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I certainly think that there isn't enough knowledge. I'm also not sure if there is enough reach to gather that knowledge. So it's up to, interested parties, stakeholders, to make sure that understanding is promoted within the various government sectors. But I think, business as well, they need to take that responsibility. I think we know of the shortcomings of our government. It's still a very young government, albeit, we're not in a conversation about government, but we know that, there are plenty errors in that sphere. But how do we then, as a sector, as a business sector across the board, across categories, how do we impact society for the long term? And, Benedict, it's so important for me because as marketers, we continuously trying to build a pipeline of consumers, right? So if you've got these consumers that are, derelict in mind and do not have the force and power to be able to be economically viable as human beings in the long term, what are we building for? So, it's for me, it's incremental what we need to do. Yes, we may not make the profits because we all get into businesses and you've got targets to meet. I understand that, but I think we also need to understand the issues that we're facing in society and reconfigure how we look at those objectives from a business point of view and what that means long term. And obviously that means reintroduction of research, because I think that's, there's a dearth of research in our field as well. We used to use the likes of Millward Brown extensively previously and other research agencies, let me not just, the AVGs, etc. And that's kind of tapered down. So how do we bring that back to make sure that we show effectiveness, not for the immediate, but for the long term, as well as we build these consumer pipelines, which I think, right now it's flash in the pan, get the most that you can and run away. And I don't think it's sustainable for the industry that we're trying to build.
That's, I hear you on that. And I agree. I think there needs to be sustainability a little bit beyond. And we as consumers obviously have to take an onus on what we're purchasing and how it affects us in the long run. But now talk to me about transcendent brands. When I looked at the definition, it's really talks to selling a promise, right? You go beyond and above the range of a normal and a physical experience. And I think when I said, okay, let me look at how this affects us in South Africa, because I think one has to always bring it back home. Woolworths is one of those brands, their tagline being the difference. And when you associate with Woolworths, even growing up, I remember this ad that I loved, which was Woolworths, the inside story. And you just look at the quality, and it was this wool and it was quality. And till today, Woolworths is associated with quality, right? So it's been able to live up to a transcendent brand. But is that the way, do you think, in your opinion, that's a way that brands should be moving to? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the promise that some brands try to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, so, and of late, we've been talking about brand platforms and what they mean. And I mean, I've been in this industry for close on 20 years, and having seen, I remember that Woolworths ad, and where there have been shifts. And I think the reason why there is such a big focus on transcendent brands right now is because we have gone through the economic meltdown in 2008. And soon after that, everything started being superbly commercialized and I feel almost tactical, right? Yeah. And it speaks to what I've just spoken to, where it's literally a flash in the pan, go in there, be tactical, get what you want and get out. But I think when you realize what that does for brand, it doesn't build for consistency. It doesn't build for that memory structure that actually helps the brand sustain itself through whatever time it needs to sustain itself through. I'm sure many brands want to live beyond 5 years from inception, beyond 20 years, etc. So I do find it quite interesting that there are brands that have remained consistent in their belief. And I think it's like, I always compare or liken brands to human beings. Yeah. Bernadette has probably grown, and let me talk about myself rather, but I'm a girl who grew up in Soweto. I've always liked nice things, but they progress over time, but my core remains the same. I'd like to believe, I remain a humble human being. I remain steadfast in my beliefs to empower people, etc. But it's just, I may change my lipstick over time. And I think it's sticking to the core of what the brand stands for. Woolies has always been about quality. Yeah. Nike, in I think the over close to 70 years that it's been around, has been about athleticism. So I think it's sticking to that, but also understanding the eras through which the brand is moving and obviously adapting. These days we talk about the adaptability quotient amongst human beings. So what is that for brands? And are the people responsible for those brands taking that seriously and understanding that, no, we're not going to shift center. We're not going to shift your soul and heart, but what, how you express it and keeping that consistent as a brand platform that continues to build for better. But also, that may change as well. Quality may be something that then shifts completely in society. So I think there always needs to be the utility of the brand and what it delivers. And then the consumer, and I don't think consumers necessarily change. We are living in the age of ageism, 40-year-olds against 20-year-olds and the different things that they desire in life. But I do think that there are certain qualities that remain steady in humanity that we need to dig a bit deeper for, especially for companies, more than just brands, but for companies, and to stick close to. And I think then that will build for sustainable branding and brands.
I like how you talk about the 40s versus the 20s, because the youth has really been able to influence the direction of brands, right? I mean, we've seen recently with COVID where young people are no longer just buying a brand, but they want to know, what are you doing to change my world? What are you doing to positively impact the environment? And that shift is quite an interesting one, because throughout, youth has always played with it. Was the hippies, and now we have the Gen Zs. They've always had that influence in terms of branding. And how does it formulate your thinking as an agency when you guys put together, whether it's the MTN ad or even the recent one? I mean, I don't know if you could talk, but I know the F&B ad has shifted as well. Yeah. And when I looked at it, it looks like the Wi-Fi sign upside down. And I was like, wow, it's interesting how that shift is there. How have you guys, what is the methodology you put in place when you then put together a campaign and something that is geared to the youth?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I speak a lot about insights. We have a lot of stakeholders that we have conversations with about these things. Yeah. At first, we live in the world of data, and we actually have a group of youngsters that sit and troll the net, have conversations, and literally dig for, rich insights that we can then use to develop our campaigns. Obviously, it needs to hold true to what the brand represents continuously. So in the case of MTN, we know that it stands for Africa's Progress. So when we talk about Africa's Progress and we invert that into a a line, a platform such as what are we doing today? It's actually a provocation that says, Bernadette, as a South African human being, or somebody, Chiloma in Zambia, what are you doing today to move yourself? Because also it's not just about the company or the utility, but us getting up and doing something ourselves. So we do, in terms of methodology, it is tapping into the insights. We've got the likes of Yellowwood internally that then work on the strategies, and hopefully, but also we don't always get it right? And that's something that I think as a marketing community need to remember. But we do try, and reactions may differ from community to community, but I think it's also allowing the work to seep into the system, and the system that is the community. Because sometimes at face value, you might not understand it. And we may, in the case of F&B, release a logo with a TV ad. And then when you see what's to come, which I can't expose right now, you see the whole ecosystem, because it's never just about the logo. It's a meaning that you imbue into the logo. It's the conversations that, the people have around the brand. It's the collateral that surrounds the brand and everything in relation to that then builds to a brand. It's the age-old conversation, the Philip Kotlers of the world, where we say that, a brand is the sum of its, I forget, but of its parts. And not just, not just the logo, not just the name, not just the pay of light, but everything, the ecosystem. Yeah. So we sit in here and look at these reactions, but we also know that there's so much more that we are delivering beyond just a TV ad. And I think that's our take on it, really.
I really appreciate what you mentioned about how certain brands react in different markets, right? I know, for instance, Nando's didn't work in Mozambique because, all of us know the Portuguese recipe, so it's easier to work, and it didn't make a big dent in the economy. And similarly, Woolies, when it went to Nigeria, wasn't considered as a quality the way we are so crazy about Woolies, right? I think for small business or business in general, I'd be interested to get your take on how one is able to do that, because I think, and also going back to the discussion about how, you spoke about how South Africans have this notion that Africa and we are this little South Africa, there's a difference. Yeah. But there isn't, but there is, because, you cannot take a brand in Mozambique and try and extrapolate that in Angola and think you're going to have the same results, right? Talk to me about how brands are able to be sensitive to the audience that they serve, and how if you're a small business trying to enter into a market, what thinking needs to go into place before you try to actually get into that.
People, you cannot ignore the people. In the case of Woolworths in Nigeria, I understand that they had done the research that needed to be done, went in, and they were advised not to go in with the clothing, because Nigerian people prefer a certain way of dressing. They don't want to dress like everyone else. You and I may wear a me and B or the space dress, and it's okay, but they are unique in the way they dress. And the advice was rather go in with food. But there was a disregard for that piece of advice, So I think take into account the markets that you're going into. Yes, you can't be led, you can't be swayed willy-nilly with what you need to do. But I think when advice comes in as deep as it does in those kind of spaces, take heed. Test it, do a pilot rather than trying to open a big store, have deeper conversations with people. But I believe in people-focused marketing. In most instances, we know that it doesn't always fare well for brands and companies, but I honestly believe that if we are to succeed as a community of marketers, it's really coming from understanding what the people are looking for, firstly, but obviously what our product and services have to offer to those people, and then marrying those two in as intentional a way as is possible. Are our values right for that society or community? Our intentions right as well? And I don't think let me not say I don't think. I think many brands have succeeded in doing so, but and I think it's just also introspection, checking yourself continuously, on how you're faring in that market, and just doing right by that community and society. So people first, especially if you've got something that you feel you have to offer to them. Understand what it is that it'll bring to the world, and progress and betterment being, for me, the end state of any society when it deals with a brand or a product.
Okay. Tell me something. I mean, I was thinking of, the less is more that we learn about in terms of brands moving away from this big production warehouse to, exporting their products to a different market that is cheaper, got cheaper labor, not so hectic laws in terms of, wanting to go through the law in terms of
customs and
all of those blue tape and red tape and all of that. Do you think South Africa is there, or we're not doing that? And in your opinion, I mean, there was the anti-brand movement simply because of that, where jobs were being taken away from the market where the company's at to a cheaper market in the Asias where it was minimal cost to the company. Do you think South Africa is there? And, especially with regards to the conversation about buy locally, support local brands, do you think we're doing that right, or there's still a long way to go?
I think there's a long way to go. I mean, I happen to work on a South African, almost governmental company. Yeah. And we were looking to print some books, and our intention was to get paper from South Africa. We couldn't locate a roll of paper that had been produced in South Africa.
No.
Never mind, I promise you. And we had to ship the paper from China. And, we know about our various industries that are lacking, that now we are importing things. And especially with the problems that we face as a society, we know youth unemployment is at its highest. We know that we've got the highest Gini coefficient in the world. And as much as I understand the need for free trade zones and getting things done in various territories, we also, I believe, need to consider what it is that we require as a society to progress and to grow. It is a contentious issue, but I do think that we would be better served if we did do some productions in the country. I do think that we're not as industrialized as we could be to allow, a nation to thrive and grow, and even in, just how we work as a human being, a human society.
Yeah.
So my take on it is, it's great when it comes to costs and customs and all that kind of stuff. And this is my capitalist head thinking. But at the same time, we do have a society that is poor, that needs the jobs, and we would be better served if, we did do quite a bit of production in country. So yeah, that's my take, Bernie.
I think you actually gave the advice that I wanted to ask you for what you would say to small businesses, because would you say that, or is there something else you'd like to add? Because that is quite important, especially for businesses or entrepreneurs who are so when I started my first business, it was my surname and, it was Bule Connect. But when I really looked at the brand itself, it was very difficult to identify what we do. Great, you've got your surname here and you've got the legacy. You want your kid to know that, hey, mom's got a company called Bule Connect. But what does it do, right? So just in terms of how companies brand their name and brand themselves, what advice do you have in terms of considering the end goal?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're fortunate now that we do live in an environment where social media is mostly free. You can go to Instagram, you can go into LinkedIn and all sorts of social media platforms and tell your story. And, with targeted advertising and that kind of stuff, it becomes a little easier to tell that story. I do think that, again, a brand is the sum of its parts. So it could have been Bule, but you could have told the story, I running your own little PR exercise, because also there are a lot of small business operators that should connect, right? To be helping each other, to tell those stories, to get you onto a radio stations, to get you onto a podcast like this so that your voice is expanded. So definitely, if you are not close to those channels, I think it's be intentional about the name and the look and, you know, the corporate identity that you put out. Knowing that we are living in a fast moving world where people are exposed to so many things, you know, so how does yours cut through? Firstly, at, you know, when you look at it, when you hear it, what does that mean? But also being able to navigate the tools that are afforded to us at a whim. You know, people can easily start YouTube channels. It doesn't cost you anything. And you know, we're seeing a lot of young people who are going into this influencer space. Do you employ those tactics to tell the story? But I think it's, you know, you can't think of a brand as just a logo and a name. There's so much more that goes into it. Think about, you know, the conversations that you have that are adjacent to the business that you do. Think about other small businesses that can help you, and you can help them as well, you know, because I think it speaks to that concept of collaboration and how you use it to your, you know, your advantage as a community of small businesses. And then social media. I can't talk more about social media because we know, you know, it's there, but it also has to be clean. It has to tell the story clearly. So, and look, I mean, it gets a little flouncy and bouncy in the beginning, but I think once you get into the rhythm of doing it, you start realizing that, you know, there is a way about it. There's plenty tools online as well that you can tap into and understand what time of day is best to post for your kind of brand, what target audiences, or people are not waiting for your messages, by the way, what target customers you're looking at speaking to, and how do you speak to them in the most appropriate ways. So in short, logo and name are but one piece of the job. The bigger job is what you do with that business and what you know, the tools you allow yourself to be exposed to tell your story.
Masego, thank you so much for your time. I actually didn't get to introduce you, but I have to do this so that everyone knows who I'm talking to, because I think, you know, I need to respect the fact that you took time to come on to the Entrepreneusr Pit Stop Podcast. Masego's professional experience spans 18 years and includes working for various agencies and companies, including SAB and Zental. Oh, and here we are talking bad about SAB.
I know. But they know, and they're trying their best, I will say. Yeah.
Appreciate that. You have worked on various brands in industries like telecoms, food and beverage, mining, and services. And I see that you're a true believer in the industry and the potential it has to the work it does on an impact, to have an impact on societal discourse. Masego, thank you so much for your time. Any parting words before we let you go?
Yeah, maybe picking up on that last point, Bernadette, you know, I always say to my teams, we have the luck of you know, being exposed to people on a daily basis. I mean, we have the opportunity to be on radio stations through the adverts that we put out, on TV, in you know, on social media. So for me, and this includes the marketing community beyond just advertising, what is it that we're doing to impact society? Yes, it can't always be about, you know, what society needs, because we have commercial objectives that we need to meet. But I do believe that if we think deeply about what we do, and, you know, when we think about the Millennial Development Goals and our NDP, what is it as a community of marketers can we do to impact that? And that would be it. Like, let's think a bit more and consider what it is that we do to change a little for the better, and so that we have customers and consumers in the future that are able to engage with our brands for the long term.
Awesome stuff. Masego, thank you so much. Feel better. Thank you for making the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks,
all right, Bernadette.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.
Brought to you by Bernadette Boule.